Hello.
Hello.
Welcome to Session 5 of the Parenting Teenagers course.
We hope you found the course enjoyable and helpful, and that it's making a difference to your family life.
In this session, we'll be looking at how we can help our teenagers make good choices about some of the big issues they face, such as drugs, alcohol, sex, the use of the internet, and so on. Some of these subjects might feel difficult and embarrassing for us to discuss with them.
Parenting teenagers is at times highly enjoyable and at others deeply frustrating.
In the summer that Benj was taking his final exams before leaving school, he asked if we would help him to buy a ticket for a big music festival that was taking place over a weekend in the depths of the countryside, about 3 hours away from London.
We thought it sounded like a really good way for him to unwind after all the revision pressure of his exams. So we waved him off, wishing him a great time.
He called us late on Sunday evening to say the car they'd travelled in was stuck. And then, to our absolute horror, right at the end of the conversation, he mentioned that he had his final Spanish exam first thing on Monday morning, and he wasn't sure if he'd make it back in time.
We couldn't believe it. We were simultaneously furious that he hadn't told us he still had a paper to do, and frustrated with ourselves that we hadn't checked. Neither Scylla nor I slept that night, thinking Benj had blown his chances. Somehow he made it back, totally exhausted, scraped into his exam just in time. He didn't do very well in that paper.
Teenagers won't always get it right, but we can't cocoon them in a protective bubble from all the dangers in the world at large. Inadequate though we may feel, our task is to equip them as well as we can, because they're going to have to learn to make their own choices.
One of the things that I've found, speaking personally as a parent, is that I can't make my teenagers do anything. They have to choose to do it for themselves, and they understand that there are then consequences to how they do things, and that might be consequences that I then impose upon them, or they might be natural consequences. But it's important that they take ownership of their own decisions for themselves. And I've actually found it incredibly helpful to know that I can't control my teenagers. I can tell them to do things, I can suggest things, but ultimately the choice is theirs. And that's very helpful for me as a parent, and very releasing.
The stories we see in the media about binge drinking, teenage pregnancies, drug abuse and predators online can easily make us feel daunted. But we can't take the ostrich approach and put our head in the sand. We mustn't let our fears stop us addressing these subjects.
I have to say I'm frightened of them growing up, and I shouldn't be. It's like I was frightened of them crossing the road for the first time by themselves. I was frightened of them going to town, and my imagination works overtime and thinks, oh gosh, some evil danger's going to befall them. But it won't, and for me, for them growing up, I sort of worry that they might not find their way, you know, that they'll get lost. But they seem to be coping, and so by what's happened so far, I don't think that I should have any major fears about how it's going to go. If it carries on like it is, at a steady pace, I think they'll be fine. But I do find it frightening, yeah.
As much as parents want to protect their teenagers, teenagers often want to protect their parents from knowing what they're up to, and that can make it really hard for everyone.
I'm aware that the kids sometimes don't tell the truth because they know that we won't like the truth, but we still underline that this is very important, that they tell the truth. It's key. It's essential to life.
Mm. And that was definitely an issue for me, lying and
you were always
being afraid and to tell you the truth. Yeah.
The world our teenagers inhabit can in many respects seem very foreign to us. They may well know a lot more than we do about some of the areas where we need to guide them, but that's okay. As well as getting informed and giving advice, we can learn from them. That will particularly apply to new technology and the changing digital landscape.
When my boys became teenagers, it is indeed a wake-up call, because I suddenly found that I know less than they do. So that's been difficult. But part of the battle is actually accepting that I don't know everything, even if I'm a parent.
This is the task of every mother or father, to get our kids ready for the moment when we're not by their side. But we have an extra challenge here, don't we? Because our children know more about this than we do. So we have to get up to speed. Perhaps not as fast as them, but at least we have to know well, what's going on.
We've talked earlier in the course about the pressures on our teenagers, the peer pressure, their need to feel accepted, their desire to explore and experiment, their changing hormone levels, their feelings of insecurity and the need to discover their own identity.
There is another pressure today. Absolute values have been replaced by relative values in many people's thinking. Feelings have become the arbiter of what is right and what is wrong. Pop icon Noel Gallagher once advised, if it feels good, then do it.
Our teenagers are exposed to a lot of pressure to do things at a younger and younger age. Having sex is considered the norm. One journalist wrote recently, they listen to their peers to whom sex seems cool and grown up. They watch pop videos full of sexual references, adverts which assume that sexual activity is the key to happiness, TV programmes in which everyone leaps from one bed to the other. From as young as 12, they're expected to be sexually aware and body conscious. Today's young people are victims of a savagely free culture, which no longer gives them permission to say no.
For teenagers, their image and what they look like can also be a huge pressure.
For a girl, I think having the right figure is always one, but definitely hanging out with, cooler people and going out and having a good time like a teenager would typically do, like maybe drinking and stuff like that, just to be fairly cool, really, I guess.
I faced a lot of peer pressure when I was growing up, from age 13 on to 18, 19. There were parties, drinking, drug abuse. It was a constant battle for a lot of people. I was able to resist it sometimes not, but it was hard. And I think it's hard for a lot of people, a lot of young people who are insecure like I was.
Linda Blair, a clinical psychologist, states that most teenagers today take drugs because they're there, an instant route to feeling better about themselves.
All the principles and the practical tools that we've talked about on this course will help us to build the self-esteem of our teenagers. This, in turn, builds their confidence to resist peer pressure and to say no when they want to and need to.
Our role as parents remains crucial. Despite what we may feel, surveys reveal that most teenagers want to hear about issues like drugs, sex and alcohol from us.
Parents play such an important role in passing their values on to their teenagers. And I think so many parents today feel powerless. Lots of parents say to me that surely the peer group or society are more influential than we are, but that's so untrue. If parents are connected, spending time with their children, giving them boundaries, giving them love, giving them authority, and being with them, they are fundamentally influential. There's a lot of evidence to say that teenagers may go through that rebellious phase, but will return to the moral and value framework that their parents have given them, and that's to be celebrated. So my one thing to parents, I say, don't give up. Don't think that society and peer have more sort of influence on your children. You have the fundamental greatest influence for good or for bad.
Teenagers are under more pressure with these big issues than ever before and need our guidance.
It's harder for children today than ever it was for us. One psychologist put it like this. He said, when I was a teenager, I walked down a corridor, and either side of the corridor were doors. And on the doors were written things like excessive alcohol, gambling, promiscuous lifestyle, drug abuse. He said, but all the doors were locked. And occasionally you hear about one of your friends who'd gone behind one of the doors. He says, today's teenager walks down that corridor and all the doors are open. And their friends are in the room saying, what are you doing out there? We're having a blast. It's why it's vital that parents take time to talk to their children about these big issues. Sex, drugs, self-esteem. If we don't talk to them about sex, somebody else will. And that is true for all of the big issues. Passing on our values takes patience, grace, time, but it's absolutely vital.
Because we love our children, we want the very best for them. Part of our role in discussing these issues is to give them a longer perspective. They need to know that if they sleep with someone, there's a risk of the girl getting pregnant or of either of them catching a sexually transmitted disease.
Images they look at on a screen will stay with them and can affect their thoughts and emotions for years to come.
If they get drunk on a regular basis, they can do things they'll later regret.
They may not hear elsewhere what is best for them and for their future.
As part of a study in sex education at school, a newspaper article reported a girl called Faye saying this: I think we should have been told about the emotional side of it, how it can screw you up, how you can get involved with people who don't want to know you.
With regard to smoking, we need to give our teenagers a longer view about the health risks and how easily it can lead to addiction, how starting is so much easier than stopping.
If they take drugs, they need to know it can affect their brains and they can become addicted.
Many parents feel they should be drug experts. We can't possibly be drug experts. Even the drug experts have to do a lot of work keeping up with all the facts and information. But what parents can be are parents, but also communicating about the fact they know their child and getting the child to think about the drug, the situation and the behaviour it might cause. So, for instance, the majority of teenagers have their first sexual experience under the influence of alcohol, and then they may regret it. That actually it may cause antisocial behaviour or it may cause addiction. It's not just the drug, it's the individual child and the situation they find themselves in. Some also, we know that alcohol, laying down lines of addiction in the brain. If you drink alcohol from a young age as an adolescent, we're talking about maybe even 15, 16, 17, 18, there can be effects like that. So you have a conversation again, not necessarily the hardcore facts about an individual drug, but the global issues about addiction, about behaviour, about the individual, and how it might make you feel. And it's an ongoing conversation again.
In the parenting book, there are separate chapters on alcohol and other drugs, sex and sexuality, and another on money, TV and the internet, with information that's valuable to discuss with our teenagers. If possible, we suggest both parent and teenager read a chapter and then talk about the subject together.
In doing so, we're helping our teenagers to make informed choices and to construct a moral framework to live by.
In order for children to develop and in order for teenagers to develop a moral framework, it's very important that they have a self-awareness initially. So personal social education within schools, whilst criticised in some quarters, is vital in making children aware who they are, what they stand for, what is important to them, where their strengths, where their weaknesses are.
We've really found it an important thing to be teaching our values to the children, because it really occurred to me, whose values do you want your teenagers to actually pick up? If they spent more time watching TV and reading magazines and talking to their peers than they ever do with their own family, then there's a chance they may not pick up the values that we think are really important.
Teaching my children about what's right and wrong is very important, not only in their acceptable behaviour to other people, but to themselves. You know.
As a family, I think for us the important values are honesty with each other, and I think showing respect.
For example, our faith values are really important to us, but again, it's not something we can enforce or impose on them. We have to model it and encourage them and invite them to, and make it as user-friendly as possible without excluding or prescribing or dominating their own, allowing them their own freedom to make their own decisions and find their own faith values, if you like.
The opportunities arise just by living to teach a value. And there's one I remember when Liam was part of a rugby team, and he was expected to be there every Saturday morning to play rugby. And on a Friday evening, there was an opportunity to have an all-night lock-in with the youth group. And so we actually said to Liam, you can go. We're really happy for you to go. But you've got this commitment on Saturday morning, and we will pick you up at 9 o'clock and we will take you to your rugby club and you will play rugby. He went off to the lock-in, and it was up to him how much sleep he got, but we were there to pick him up and take him off to rugby club the next morning. So he got that understanding of commitment, and we just saw that he was probably about 12 at the time, 13, but we realised that that was a value that we wanted him to carry right into his adult life.
When the going gets tough and our teenagers are faced with hard choices, the conversations we've had with them and the values they've absorbed will help to protect them.
We need to pass on advice, even though it won't always be apparent they're listening or agreeing with anything we say.
You know, all over the world I meet parents who say, I must be the worst mother on the face of the earth. I'm a most terrible father. But when you've been doing this for as long as I have the privilege now of talking to men and women in their 20s, whose parents I spoke to when they were small children. And they say to me, you know, my mum and dad thought I didn't listen to a thing, but I did listen. And what they said to me about alcohol came to me that night when I was in the pub. And although I did start smoking, what they said to me about smoking came to me when I was 17. And when I was about to climb into bed with my boyfriend, what my mum said to me that night really made me step back in that moment. It is incredible how much we do affect our children. We must never give up. We are their mother, we are their father. And you know what? If they know that we love them deeply, our words have an extra power. We sow those seeds, we keep planting, and we wait for them to grow. And they always do grow.
So, to help our teenagers make good choices, we'll need to get informed ourselves on the basic facts so we can work out how best to equip them. First, drugs. We need to know how and why taking drugs can affect a person's mental health and emotional stability.
As well as talking to our teenagers, on a practical level, our encouragement would be not to give them too much money. When children have access to a lot of money, there are greater opportunities and temptations with regard to drugs and alcohol.
If we're worried about whether our teenager is being offered drugs or is under pressure to take them, taking an indirect approach is best, so they don't feel attacked or accused. They're more likely to open up through a casual chat than an intense grilling.
I remember there was a conversation we had with one of our children where the start of the conversation was something like, do you come across drugs at a party, or are any of your friends taking drugs, or what happens at these sorts of parties? And it gives freedom for them to start to talk about the pressures they're under without actually feeling that they're the ones under the spotlight. And so drugs has been very helpful to do that in a sort of what's happening at parties kind of conversation.
A second area we need to address is alcohol. Whatever our own views about drinking alcohol, this will probably be a big issue for our teenagers. We have to think carefully about what we model as well as what we tell them.
Parents have to understand that the way that they treat alcohol is also a lesson that their children are going to learn. So if they are constantly saying, oh, I could kill for a drink, or I could murder a pint of beer, it's giving children the message that you have to have the alcohol in order to be able to cope. And that is a message which is going to help children rely upon alcohol when they're older. So I think the parents have to understand that alcohol and the way that they relate to it are values that will be transferred to their children. And just be mindful of that when you drink in front of your children.
We need to be informed about the effects of alcohol and what constitutes a unit and the number of units that are safe for men and women.
We need to make sure our children know the law regarding the age at which they're allowed to go into a bar or are allowed to buy alcohol from an off-licence, so that we can have an informed discussion. This will vary greatly between countries.
For some parents, in some cultures, drinking alcohol will be a non-negotiable. For other parents, this will be a negotiable issue, particularly if they're trying to teach their teenagers to drink in moderation at an appropriate age.
I think it comes down to the individual. With Alexander, he was very insistent he wouldn't touch alcohol until he was 18. He was totally sold on that one himself, whereas Oliver, being a more free-spirited child, just wanted to push the boundaries. And it's about managing that compromise with them. Yes, you may allow a bit of alcohol, but don't take it to excess.
Parties are the time when our teenagers will be under the most pressure to drink alcohol. We need to help them to make good choices in these situations, and we can do a lot by talking through a sort of party checklist with them.
For example, will parents or other adults be there? Will alcohol be served? What will you say if you're offered alcohol? What time does the party end, and how are you intending to come home?
More than likely, they'll say we're making a huge fuss about nothing, but persevere. Once they know we're serious and we're doing this to support and help them navigate the sometimes choppy waters of teenage parties, they'll get the hang of it.
I remember one party I dropped somebody off at. They were so mortified at the idea of me going to this party, they would almost rather have died. So I went in, I drove them to a party, them and their friends, and I went in on my own to this teenage party, and everyone looked at me as if I was a complete freak, and spoke to the parent and said, you are expecting this child, la la la, yes. I went out, and then they went in on their own as though nothing had happened. So they could disclaim all ownership of having anything to do with me at all. It was hilarious, but it worked for me. I got what I needed, he got what he needed, and it was all okay.
One mother with 2 teenage girls said, "I always cook them a favourite meal before they go to a party, so I know they've got food in their stomachs in case they're offered a drink of anything."
Third, we need to discuss with our teenagers the issue of sex. Penny Palmano, writing about teenagers, observes, "The age at which teenagers become attracted to the opposite sex appears to get younger and younger. When I was 13, I was still going to marry my pony."
As with all these issues, we can help our children to know they have a choice and encourage them to have the confidence to say no when they want to.
There was an article not long ago by a teacher writing in the national press about the need to help teenagers faced with the pressures to be sexually active.
She described trying to get an essay from a girl who'd suddenly stopped working. She burst into tears and told her she couldn't concentrate on anything while she was so worried. She thought she was pregnant. The teacher wrote,
"An hour later, going against every rule in the book, I was standing outside a lavatory cubicle reading Sarah the instructions on a pregnancy testing packet. I suspect I was praying as hard as she was while we waited for the blue lines. She was not pregnant. She hugged me and wept some more and thanked me. The next morning, she brought me the essay."
This teacher also described an occasion when one of the girls she taught asked her, "Is it all right if I don't sleep with my boyfriend? I don't want to, yet they all say I'm being tight." Her relief when I told her that it was certainly all right was almost palpable.
Talking to our children about sex, little and often over the years, is much better than one big talk. The temptation is to think if we cover everything all in one go, then we'll never have to talk about it again. But an intense, in-depth lecture will tend to turn them off.
We have talked about the subject of sex. It probably started when they were quite young, when we were watching TV together, because, again, it's a bit-by-bit approach. And sometimes if there's something on the TV in a TV programme, then it sparks a conversation. But I can't ever remember having a major talk. One of the issues that did come up recently with the girlfriend was that I asked my son not to have her in his bedroom with the bedroom door closed because I felt uncomfortable about that in the house. Quite often they take over our lounge and they're on the sofa together, all having great big cuddles and so on, and watching a film together. But I think I would rather it was in a room that is a little more public than perhaps in the bedroom. So that's why I asked him to keep the bedroom door open.
I remember you talking about some of your friends and just the pressure that you're under and teenagers are under to have sex early on, way earlier than you're ready for. And I think we've talked about that issue in relation to friends, but sometimes it's also applied to you.
Right. Yeah, it definitely happens a lot. Where I live in Canada, it's at a young age as well. I mean, I'm sure it happens everywhere. But I saw it going on. And with people would be having sex who didn't even know each other. They'd be drunk and 12 years old or 13 years old. It was scary for me. What is going on? I didn't know much about it or had never experienced it, so it was all just foreign to me.
You mean you hadn't experienced sex? What do you mean by that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
Our teenagers will have many questions, voiced or unvoiced, about sex, such as, how far can they go with the opposite sex in terms of touching or kissing?
How do they know if they're in love?
What about masturbation, homosexuality, abortion, pornography?
Should they start going out, dating, as a young teenager?
We need to have thought about these areas so we can give them some practical guidance.
Parents do need to be talking to their children as adolescents and teenagers about sex and sexuality. It gets slightly trickier as they enter the adolescent years because they may be embarrassed about it, but not all are, can I say. But what you're doing is you're building on what you've hopefully already done. And some examples are the importance of talking about pornography, which is flooding the internet, and lots of teenagers, well, children as young as 8, boys particularly, are exposed to pornography and they want to have a context to put it in. Some boys the other day I was talking to saying, nobody's talking to us about this, Judy, we need to talk about it. But also you need to do it in a subtle way, in a different way. For an example, I remember a parent telling me that she'd gone to see a film with her 15-year-old son and there was quite a rampant sex scene. in it, and rather than reacting to it, they talked about, you know, what it was about. And he said to her, "I hope my first time isn't like that. I hope it's different." And she said, "Well, what do you mean by that?" And they had a little brief conversation about what he'd like it to be like. Then they moved on. So you don't labour it. You pick up newspapers, films, things like that, and you have a conversation and you move on. It's drip by drip by drip.
When our own teenagers first started going out with a boyfriend or girlfriend, we discussed guidelines with them and what we expected about physical boundaries. We impressed upon them it was their responsibility to be clear about these boundaries with the other person, and the onus was on them to uphold these standards for both their sakes.
One of our non-negotiables was to encourage them to keep sex for marriage. So we didn't allow them to sleep in the same room as a boyfriend or girlfriend, and didn't want them staying over at a boyfriend or girlfriend's house with no parents around.
Then we had to trust them to make good choices based on the advice and the values we'd imparted to them. We would rehearse our guidelines again if and when we were worried that they were feeling under pressure to cross a boundary. And we warned them that alcohol could lead them to do things they might later regret.
We also need to talk to our teenagers about sexually transmitted diseases, STDs. Currently in the UK, 1 in 10 16 to 19-year-olds carries the disease chlamydia, which is symptomless for carriers, but can later damage a woman's fertility and may lead to an ectopic pregnancy.
Teenagers need to know that condoms don't offer 100% protection against either STDs or pregnancy.
We're giving them a long-term view, not only to protect them now, but so they're best equipped to build a lasting relationship when they're older. We decided to talk to our own children about the difference between cohabitation and marriage, and to explain why, statistically, couples who cohabit before marriage are more likely to split up.
I remember one woman who married young and was soon divorced saying to us, "We fell into bed together at university. We got married a few years later. I see now how living together clouded our judgment. We were totally unsuited to each other."
Whatever our own values regarding sex, if we want to help our teenagers make wise choices, we do this best by talking with them.
Well, the values that are important to us are that they appreciate that they are precious beings. And I'm talking in terms now of boyfriends and things like that. We're trying to help them to understand not to sleep around, don't try sex out just because everybody else is all out of curiosity. We are trying to instill in them that that is something really precious about yourself, and once you've given it away, it's gone. And so it's best, if you can, to save that for your husband.
It's absolutely vital that parents talk to their children about sex, but we have to be careful not just to be negative, not just bring to them the dreadful warnings of things that can go wrong, but also the message that sex is a good thing, that sex is a beautiful thing, that sex is a gift of God. And I think it's very compelling for a mother and father to say, I share this with you, my sexual ethic, what I believe is right and wrong, because I want the best for you. Not because I want to rob you of fun, but I want to bring you not only fun, but satisfaction and relationships that will last a lifetime.
A fourth area where we need to help our teenagers make good choices is with the internet and electronic games. The world of the internet and electronic games is changing fast. We may feel very ignorant, but we need to get up to speed, both so we can know what's going on in our teenagers' world and so we can guide them about the choices they make.
We can help them to see the great opportunities of online communication, as well as the potential dangers. There'll be implications to what they post online. A UK government advisor on the internet recently warned teenagers, be wary of making impulsive tweets or social networking updates. There's no such thing as confidentiality in cyberspace. Teenagers need to be aware that what they put on the internet now will be there for many years and may well be read by potential employers and others.
You know, Chloe's age 14 and she goes to a party. She sees her friends around a computer and she hears words like minging and beautiful. They've logged on to a teenage magazine's website, How Sexy Are You? And kids all over the world scan their photographs in and kids vote on how sexy they are. Chloe picks a photograph and she scans it in on an October afternoon, and over the next 14 days, hundreds of kids vote on how sexy Chloe is. Her friends score an average of 8.5 out of 10. Chloe never manages to hit 5. What a pressure this is for a young woman. And what is the task for a mother or father if she could rewind the clock before she scanned that photograph in? To say to her daughter, darling, you don't have to play every game on the internet. You don't have to be part of everything. You can make choices about what you put on the internet, what you watch, what you take part in. We are doing with the internet now what we used to do with television. Help our children make choices for when we're not by their side.
Our teenagers also need to know that information or items they put on the internet will potentially be there forever and could impact their future. There are other issues to address, such as the amount of time and the way teenagers communicate online.
Another danger is that children can tend to take on a much bolder and more sexually expressive tone when they're communicating online. They tend to be more flirtatious and risky and can start to present a different person to their real self. For some, messaging becomes obsessive. It's almost as if our teenagers have gone out with their friends without physically leaving the house. One father with young teenagers said, "Our main control is time limits. They're not allowed to go on a social networking site until they've done their homework. So they can only do 30 to 60 minutes a day, max."
Electronic games, as with the internet, can be highly addictive, and some are extremely violent. When played obsessively, they can lead to changes of behaviour in teenagers. We need to be monitoring the content of what they're playing. Even apart from that, too much screen time can affect our teenagers' ability to relate.
Most people are concerned about internet safety and pedophilia on the internet. But the real risk to many more children is the fact that while they're spending more and more time interacting with virtual friends, they're actually spending far less time in face-to-face contact with real friends, as well as the people that love them, members of their family. Eye-to-eye contact has dropped dramatically. And with that comes the fact that our children are not learning how to get along with people, how to negotiate relationships. Their social skills are not being fully developed, and these are absolutely imperative if they're going to have successful relationships and successful marriages in future.
As with all these issues, it's what we model that will have a big influence on our teenagers.
It's really important to lead by example. If you ask your children not to spend too much time on the internet, this message is really undermined by continually checking emails on a BlackBerry or running to the laptop. So it's important to be consistent as a family in your approach to the internet.
We can encourage them to use the internet, but also alert them to the risks and take steps to make it as safe as we can.
We need to put in the best up-to-date filters, but at the end of the day, our teenagers' best filter will be their brains, as we teach them to make good choices. This will then help to protect them and the choices they make at home, in other people's houses, at school, or on somebody else's mobile.
I think children need to understand too that there is a lot of information within the media, within the internet, that is amoral. It's not giving a moral message, and they have to put their own moral understanding on that and decide, is this thing contributing, is it building up, is it something that is positive, is it something that is neutral, or actually is it something that is destructive in terms of their personal well-being and the well-being of their peers.
Some parents think that if they got things wrong themselves as a teenager or since, whether with drugs or sex or alcohol or the internet, they have no right to guide their children or put in boundaries on that issue. But we mustn't let our own mistakes stop us. Rather, we can pass on to our teenagers what we've learned, perhaps at a cost to ourselves.
I can remember, actually, I was at a friend's house when I was a teenager, and we watched a horror movie, and my parents would never have a horror movie on. And actually, it really scared me silly, and I had nightmares after that for a long time. And so these sorts of stories you're able to share with your teenagers to say, this is a consequence if you do these things. Please learn by our mistakes. Don't discover them for yourself.
There's lots to discuss with each of these big issues facing our teenagers today.
That's the end of part 1. Please look now at the questions in your manual.